We camped on the plateau above Whitehorse after driving in from Johnson's Crossing. The identifying landmark for Whitehorse is a perfectly balanced DC-3 used as a wind vane near the airport above the city. Whitehorse, the capital of the Youkon Territory, has a population of about 28,000, and 3/4 of the Yukoners reside around Whitehorse. Views of the city streets show the hill above the Whitehorse in the background. Whitehorse's streets are much like any small town in the United States. Our first stop was a guided tour of the historic buildings of Whitehorse, of which there are many dating back to the gold rush days. The most famous is centered around the Yukon and White Pass Railroad and the Klondike Sternwheeler, the link bringing prospectors, businessmen, and women from Skagway to the goldfields further north. There are many museums in Whitehorse, along with historic shows, fine dining, and many summer activities. This first museum was a church showing life in the early 1900s and some of the sacraments. I'm not sure what denomination this was. Also a fine woman's fur coat, and Bev giving the sermon for the day. What follows is a very rare white moose and other animals in the exhibits. Very good exhibits of stuffed animals in these buildings. This is the Robert Service Museum, the famous poet who penned The Cremation of Sam McGee, which is my favorite poem, along with many poems. Within his complex there is many artifacts, and particularly a tent showing old-time prospectors and how they lived. One of the keys to the success of the gold rush was the narrow gauge railroad that went from Skagway to Whitehorse, called the Yukon and White Pass Railway. The second key to the success of the gold rush, bringing thousands of people into the area, was the flat-bottom sternwheelers. The large cargo area on one side carried generally supplies, but on the other side it carried a large amount, heavy weight of the silver ore that was mined in Mayo and brought into here to the Yukon for further processing in San Francisco. Here we see where the wood cut along the sides of the Yukon are loaded onto the ship for their fireboxes. The guide shows us the engine room and how it was set up, and along each side of the sternwheeler was this engine. It's here in three pictures. Here's the second picture of the engine, and then the third picture here shows the length and size of the engine on each side. We have the dining room for the very wealthy guest and a view of the actual paddle wheel. Sternwheelers do not have any superstructure underneath. All that is braced on top by heavy poles and cables that actually support and control the weight of the boat. Our captain's cabin is up here, and this is the view from the captain's cabin. There are many museums in Whitehorse, but we selected the Yukon Transportation Museum for examples of other fine displays. Skagway was the jumping off place up the Chillicothe Trail to the Youkon Territory and Whitehorse. Shortly out of Skagway, the Chillicothe Trail starts up the steep mountain, which is the Continental Divide on top, and it's a rigorous trail that costs many lives, horses, and other equipment. The Canadian Mounties set up a station on top of the Continental Divide here between Alaska and the United States to keep people from passing in without the proper supplies. It was required that every person that come up this trail heading for the goldfields carry a minimum of 2,000 pounds of food and equipment to last him for at least a year. The mounted police were very careful at patrolling this, and was a hardship to many of the miners. Here is some transportation, a sled, and of course the Yukon route sled that they had. We had some nice pictures here of some old-time equipment, truck here, and a few pictures of the Alcan Highway, some vehicles used on that. We now leave the Alaska Highway heading north on the Klondike Loop to Canada's largest silver mining fields around Mayo and Keno, then on to the famous Dawson City, often just called Dawson. From Dawson across the top of the World Highway, and then back to the Alaska Highway west of Tok.